On a freezing, rain-soaked bridge, a homeless man stood ready to end his life. No family, no job, no future, just silence and a river waiting below. But out of nowhere, an old Marine veteran and his loyal German shepherd walked toward him. There were no dramatic speeches, no shouting, no judgment. Just one quiet question that would change everything. Have you ever learned a skill that could rebuild your life? That single sentence pulled him back from the edge and into a workshop filled with sawdust, second chances, and the first spark of hope he'd felt in years. Day by day, the veteran taught him how to shape wood, how to shape discipline, and slowly, how to shape a new life. One man teaching, one man learning, one dog watching over them both with silent loyalty. But the saddest twist was still waiting. The man who saved him wouldn't live long enough to see what he became. Before we start the full story, hit subscribe, leave a comment, and share this video. Because someone out there might be standing on their own bridge right now, and this might be the miracle they need. Winter pressed down on the outskirts of Bend, Oregon, with a grayness that felt deliberate, as if the clouds themselves had chosen to hang low and heavy above the Deschutes River. The air smelled of cold iron and wet pine. A fine, needling drizzle stitched itself into coats and hair and the seams of worn boots. Traffic on the old steel truss bridge was sparse. A delivery truck growled past. Then the road fell back into a hush broken only by the water's constant combing over rock. This was the kind of afternoon that shortened thoughts, that made even the town's painted storefronts look tired, and the river seemed like a door half open to a darker room. Ethan Hayes stood at the bridge's midspan with his gloved fingers curved over the railing, his knuckles whitening against metal slick with mist. 38, and lean in the hard, underfed way that made him look taller than he was. He carried the angles of a man who had laid down too many nights on concrete and park benches. His black hair, unruly and matted beneath a torn wool cap, showed the shine of dampness. His beard was scruffy and uneven, shading a jaw whose strength was easier to see than to feel. The coat he wore, once brown, now the color of dishwater, hung off him like a shed skin, and the frayed cuffs slapped softly in the wind. In his boots, both heels split open. The river's chill had already found his socks. Ethan's eyes were a river gray to match the day, watchful, exhausted, stubborn in the last way a body can be stubborn. He had spent 3 years falling, step by practical step, from a loading dock job that vanished with an automation memo to a couch, to a shelter, to a tent, to the thin promise of a cardboard sign. The world did not notice when he disappeared. He was deciding whether it would notice when he was gone. He lifted one knee to the rail and paused, feeling the grate and tremor of the bridge beneath him. The muscles in his thigh quiver with cold and fear and the strange relief of choosing. He waited for the wind to pick a direction. He had imagined a speech to himself, something clean and final, but the words tangled like fishing line. It was almost a relief to have none at all. The water below was not loud, only patient. He leaned forward to test the balance of his weight and the slickness of steel under his palm. Footsteps came from behind him, unhurried and even, the cadence of someone who trusted his footing in all weather. Ethan did not turn at first. He expected a shout, the frantic tone of a stranger discovering a crisis. Instead, a man's voice arrived beside him, steady and gravelly, carrying the warmth of a small fire catching. "Cold day to take your hands off the rail," the voice said, as if remarking on a neighbor's lawn. "Hard to hold on when the metal's that slick." Ethan glanced over his shoulder. The speaker was an older man, 72 by the lines that mapped his face and the silver close-cropped hair that glinted like frost. He was tall and still carried his shoulders like a flagpole, chest open, chin level, a posture learned where posture meant survival. His olive field jacket had seen years but not neglect. The cuffs were worn to threads, yet the buttons shone and the fabric was brushed clean. His boots were scuffed and oiled, good leather tended by a habitual hand. His eyes were a weathered blue, not the bright of youth, but the steady kind that had watched storms come and go without blinking. This was Walter Briggs, retired Marine, a man shaped by discipline and the long, quiet after of battle. There was a gentleness at the corners of his mouth that did not erase the hardness of his jaw. It only told you both could be true. At Walter's left heel sat a German shepherd, big-chested and poised as if a sculptor had chosen the exact moment between readiness and rest. The dog's coat was rich sable, dark along the back, bright at the legs and neck. And the eyes were the alert, amber brown of something that had decided long ago to love and protect the old man with his whole life. The shepherd's breath fogged the air in soft puffs. A narrow scar nicked one ear, making him look rakish rather than ruined. He watched Ethan without a growl, head slightly tilted, reading him the way good dogs do. His name was Rex, 5 years old, trained but not mechanical, affectionate without being overeager, the kind of dog whose presence made silence feel safer. Ethan's voice creaked from long disuse. "It's not your business," he said, without heat. Walter nodded as if that were fair. "Most things aren't," he said. "Still, I walk this bridge most afternoons. When I see a man sizing up the water, it becomes my business for a few minutes." He flicked his chin toward the river. "She's colder than she looks today. People think they'll go in and it'll be over quick. It isn't. Cold bites mean." Ethan managed a tight smile that wasn't one. "You giving me a weather report?" "Maybe," Walter said. "Maybe I'm buying us both a little time." He kept a respectful distance, the kind that didn't crowd a wild animal or a wounded person. Rex stayed where he was, tail curled to his haunch, eyes steady, ears pricked for the wind or a command that did not come. Ethan looked down again. The water moved with its ancient indifference. "Time's the one thing I ran out of," he said. "Time and chances." He swallowed. "Nobody needs what I don't have." "What's that?" Walter asked. "Anything," Ethan said, and the word was too small for what it meant. "I don't have a skill. I don't have a trade. I used to move pallets and break down boxes. Then a machine did it faster, and I didn't matter. I kept looking for work, and people kept looking at my clothes, or my address, which is nowhere. You can't fill out nowhere on a form." He tightened his grip on the rail until the cold ate his skin. "It's not just the money. It's feeling like a misprint." Walter breathed in the damp air and out again, a measured tide. "I've met misprints," he said softly. "Some wore uniforms. They're often the most useful lines on the page." He pointed with his chin at Ethan's hands. "You've still got all 10. Do you bite your nails?" Ethan blinked at the odd question. "No." "Good," Walter said. "Means patience lives in you somewhere. Men who chew down to the quick lose parts of their days they can't get back." He scratched Rex behind the ear. "My name's Walter. This here is Rex. He'll shake your hand if you offer it, but he's got his pride. What's your name?" "Ethan," he said, and saying it felt like proving he still existed. "Ethan," Walter repeated. "Tell me something. Have you ever learned a trade?" Anything you can do with your hands that the weather can't cancel? Ethan barked a laugh that sounded more like a cough. No, he said. I've never built a thing. Not really. I'm good at lifting and losing. That's it. Walter took a small step nearer, the kind you make when you realize the ice will hold. He spoke lightly, but his voice carried. There's a shop at the edge of town, he said. Belongs to a stubborn old man who mostly knows how to listen to wood. The shop has a stove, and a roof that doesn't leak, and a coffee pot that can't tell the difference between kings and beggars. That old man could use an extra pair of hands. Not to lift, though lifting happens, but to learn. Wood talks to all kinds of men. You don't have to shout to hear it. Ethan stared at him as if the words were a trick his mind had invented to keep him standing. You don't know me, he said. I could be anybody. You are anybody, Walter said. That's who the world is made of. He nodded toward the far end of the bridge where the tree line gathered, dark and wet, like a crowd of patient witnesses. I've got nothing to sell you. I'm offering a warm place for tonight, a bowl of stew if you can stand it, and tomorrow morning I can show you what a chisel feels like in your hand. The worst that happens is you hate it, and you walk away with a full belly and dry socks. The best that happens is you learn a name for the part of you that isn't tired yet. Rex rose without a command and took 2 careful steps forward, sniffing the damp air near Ethan's knee, then sat again with polite certainty. It felt like a benediction. Ethan's fingers loosened from the railing. The river did not grow less cold, but it grew less certain. He looked at the dog's eyes and found there a quiet, wordless insistence that tomorrow can still exist. He swallowed, and it hurt, and it meant he was alive. I've got nothing to trade, Ethan said. No money. Bring your 2 hands and your attention, Walter replied. And tell the truth when you don't know how to do something. That's worth more than money the first week. Ethan lowered his leg from the rail. His boot scraped the wet deck with a sound that made the whole afternoon tilt back toward the living. He drew a breath, the kind you take when a room's window finally opens, and nodded once. A small, decisive bow to whatever force had arranged this meeting. All right, he said. I'll come. Walter's mouth twitched into a smile, quick and clean. Good, he said. Let's get off this bridge. It's a poor place to make long plans. He turned, not touching Ethan, simply setting a pace a man could choose to match. Ethan did. Rex walked between them like a moving hearth, the river to their right, the road to their left, and a shop with light in its windows somewhere ahead in the wintering town. Walter's truck rumbled off the main road and onto a narrow gravel path that wound through a stretch of tall, dark pines. The headlights cut through drifting mist, revealing a mailbox leaning sideways, its paint chipped, the name Briggs barely legible. Beyond it stood a wooden cabin, weathered but sturdy, its porch light glowing like a small promise against the deep cold of the Oregon night. The house sat alone. No neighbors, no highway noise, just the hush of the forest and the distant voice of the river. Ethan stepped out of the truck slowly, his breath turning to vapor, his body still unsure if this was a rescue or a delay of the inevitable. He took in the cabin. Thick timber walls, a metal chimney breathing out slow ribbons of smoke, windows full of warm yellow light. It felt like a place that had not forgotten how to shelter a man. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of cedar shavings and stew simmering on a stove. The entryway opened directly into a workshop, not the polished kind seen in magazines, but one built for work that left sweat and sawdust and stories behind. Wooden mallets, hand planes, clamps, chisels, and handsaws hung in neat rows on a pegboard, each tool worn but cared for. Half-built furniture stood on workbenches, a rocking chair frame, a cabinet door, a box joint practice piece. Ethan ran his fingers along the back of a wooden chair, surprised by how smooth it was, like touching still water. Walter watched him, then tapped a shelf with the back of his hand. "Every mark in this room paid for something I needed to learn," he said. "Wood was cheaper than therapy, and it didn't talk back unless I made a mistake." Rex trotted happily inside, shook the mist from his coat, then circled the room before settling near the wood stove, paws crossed, eyes half closed, the picture of a dog who knew he was home. Ethan sat at the old kitchen table while Walter dished up bowls of beef and carrot stew. Something in Ethan's posture softened at the first taste, like a rope pulled loose after being knotted for years. "You said you learned this after the war?" he asked. Walter nodded, chewing slowly. "Came home with more noise in my head than peace. The Corps teaches you to break things. I needed to learn how to make something. Wood doesn't rush. It doesn't judge. It tells you every mistake, but it also lets you fix most of them." He looked directly at Ethan, clear, level, without pity. "If you're willing to start, I'll teach you. But it's not easy. First week, you'll stab your fingers more than the wood." The next morning, the lesson began. Walter showed him how to hold a hammer like you're asking it, not fighting it, how to drive a nail straight instead of bending it sideways, and how to measure twice before committing to a cut. Ethan tried, failed, tried again. The hammer missed and bruised his thumb. The saw veered left like it had somewhere better to be. A nail shot out, sideways, and clattered on the floor. He muttered curses under his breath. Rex watched him the whole time, occasionally padding over to press his nose against Ethan's arm, offering the silent encouragement only a dog could give. Ethan felt stupid, slow, out of place, but not unwelcome. By noon, he had a splinter in his palm, 2 blisters forming, and what resembled a crooked table leg. Walter didn't scold. He simply adjusted Ethan's grip and said, "The wood isn't wrong. The hand just hasn't learned the language yet." It wasn't praise, but it wasn't rejection either, and that alone felt like a miracle. Later that day, Ethan met the only other regular visitor to the cabin, a mail carrier named Mrs. Harper, a woman in her late 50s with short silver hair, kind eyes, and a bright red postal jacket that looked too cheerful for the weather. She was short and slightly round, with a laugh that came easily and wrinkles that suggested she had not let the world take her softness. She handed Walter a package, then turned to Ethan with a warm nod. "So you're the new student? Good. That old man needs company that isn't a dog or a piece of lumber." She didn't pry, didn't ask who Ethan was or why he was there. She just smiled and left footprints of friendliness in the snow before driving off. For Ethan, someone acknowledging him without suspicion or pity felt almost unreal. Days turned into a rhythm. Mornings in the workshop, afternoons stacking wood, evenings with stew, dog hair on the rug, and silence that didn't hurt. Walter spoke little about the past unless Ethan asked. And Ethan, for the first time in years, began asking questions. Not about survival, but about craft, about shapes and joints and the difference between pine and oak. He was clumsy, yes, but he noticed something new inside him. Focus. There was satisfaction in shaving a board smooth, in hearing the crisp sound of a nail driving true. One evening, Walter handed him a small project, a wooden box with dovetail joints. "If you can finish this without gaps, you'll know you're learning," he said. Ethan stared at the wood pieces, unsure whether to feel honored or terrified, but he nodded. As the fire cracked in the stove and Rex slept beside him, Ethan worked the wood, slow and careful. For the first time in years, his hands were doing something that wasn't just surviving. By midnight, the box wasn't perfect, but it held together, solid and true. Ethan looked at it the way a man might look at a beating heart in his own hands. Walter nodded once. Better than my first one. That was the closest thing to applause he ever gave. And for Ethan Hayes, on that quiet night in a cabin built of old timber and second chances, it was enough to feel like the world had not completely let go of him. 3 weeks passed in a flow that Ethan barely recognized as time. The days no longer blurred like they used to on the streets. They had shape now. Morning light through the pines, the scrape of a plane along wood grain, the quiet rhythm of learning something that did not reject him. His hands, once stiff and clumsy, were steadier. The blisters had become calluses. The hammer no longer felt like a weapon against him, but an extension of his will. The first crooked table leg had turned into a full set of 4, each one straighter than the last. And now, standing in Walter's workshop, Ethan looked at a chair he had built. Not perfect, not graceful, but undeniably his. 4 legs grounded, backrest curved smooth under the guidance of sandpaper and stubbornness. Walter watched him from the doorway, arms crossed, jaw slightly set, the expression of a man who refused to show pride too quickly. "You remember how to breathe now," he finally said. "Woodwork is half lungs, half hands." Ethan almost laughed. "I thought it was half pain and half splinters." "That's just the tuition fee," Walter replied. Rex circled the chair once, sniffed it, and gave a single approving huff before flopping down near Ethan's boots. The dog had grown more attached to him in quiet ways, resting his head on Ethan's knee during breaks, following him when he went to fetch wood, even sleeping a little closer to his bedroll each night, like loyalty earned instead of assumed. Walter expanded the lessons. "Building is the first thing," he said, "but life doesn't stay inside a workshop." So the next instruction was fire. How to build it even when the wood was damp. How to coax flame from shavings and patience. Then came repairing a torn section of roof, patching it with tar sheets and angled nails. Ethan learned knots, learned how to wrap gauze tightly around a cut, learned how to sharpen a blade until it gleamed like thought itself. One afternoon, Walter set down the hammer and began a different kind of lesson, one Ethan didn't expect. "You ever talk when you don't have to defend yourself?" Walter asked. Ethan paused, unsure how to answer. "People don't usually want to hear me talk." "That's because you learn to speak like you're already being judged," Walter said simply. "Try again. Use your voice like it belongs to you." So Ethan practiced. Not speeches, just sentences. Greetings, questions, opinions that were not apologies. It felt strange, like relearning how to walk after years of crawling. A new visitor came to the house during this time. Not a regular like Mrs. Harper, but someone Walter introduced with a tone of familiarity. His name was Nathan Cole, a man in his mid-40s with a shaved head, a deep scar along his jaw, and the kind of handshake that came from pulling ropes and loading freight. He worked at a lumber mill in the nearest town, tall and broad-shouldered, with a voice that sounded like old timber dragged across concrete. Nathan was not talkative, but he greeted Ethan with a respectful nod. Not pitying, not dismissive, just one man acknowledging another. "Walter says you're learning fast," Nathan said. "That true?" "I'm learning," Ethan said, and Nathan's eyes flickered with something like respect. Men didn't admire perfection. They admired honesty. Nathan dropped off a load of scrap lumber, extra planks the mill didn't need. "Figure a new pair of hands might want something to practice on," he said, then drove away in a truck that coughed smoke but held steady. As the weeks continued, Ethan found himself changing in ways that had nothing to do with muscle or skill. He slept without waking up, panicked. He spoke without waiting for mockery. He caught his reflection in a window and didn't look away. The ache in his chest, the one that used to feel like a hole, now felt like soil packed and ready for something to grow. One evening, while Walter chopped vegetables for stew, he said, "Some men are born knowing where they're going. Some get dropped in the dark and have to learn the walls by touch. You're not missing something. You're just late to the door." Ethan looked up. "Why are you helping me?" Walter didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was softer than the knife he was cleaning. "Because somebody did it for me once. I was angry and lost, and a man with less time than patience taught me how to use my hands instead of my fists. I owed him more than thanks, but all he asked was that I pass the skill to someone who needed it someday." He pointed a finger at Ethan. "Looks like you're someday." That night, Ethan lay awake on the cot in the guest room, staring at the wooden ceiling beams, feeling, not terrified of tomorrow, but curious about it. That was new. That was everything. And in the corner of the room, Rex slept with one ear raised, as if guarding this reborn version of the man who was finally learning how to live. The first sign came quietly, so quietly that Ethan almost mistook it for nothing more than winter cough. Walter had been splitting firewood beside the shed when he paused, pressed a hand to his chest, and leaned forward as if the air itself had suddenly turned heavier. He coughed once, dry, deep, and a small red drop fell onto the snow. He swept it away with the back of his glove before Ethan could see. But Rex noticed. The dog stiffened, ears rising, tail lowering, eyes locked on Walter with a worry no human language could match. Over the next days, the changes became harder to ignore. Walter's movements slowed, not from age alone, but from something lodged deeper, stealing breath and strength. His voice stayed steady, but his hands sometimes trembled before he set them in stillness again. He waved off concern the way Marines wave off rain, like it was just another thing that existed, not something to fear. One morning, after a long coughing fit that left him breathless and pale, Walter finally said he needed to get something checked. He drove into town alone, refusing help. Ethan spent the hours pacing the workshop, sanding and resanding a nearly finished table leg, unable to settle. Even Rex whined, pacing from door to window like a creature waiting for a verdict. Walter returned at dusk, but instead of heading to the workshop, he went straight to the porch and sat down heavily, staring at the tree line. He looked older, not in years, but in burden. Ethan stood at the doorframe, knowing better than to push, and simply waited. "It's cancer," Walter said finally, voice low, like a man reporting weather he couldn't change. "Stage 4, the kind that doesn't negotiate." Silence settled between them like new snow, soft but impossible to ignore. Ethan sank onto the porch step beside him. His throat tightened. "How long?" The older man shrugged, a gesture too calm for the truth beneath it. "Months if I play nice. Less if I stay stubborn." He let out a thin, dry laugh. "You know which one I'll pick." Rex moved closer, so close his head rested on Walter's knee. The old man stroked the dog's fur, fingers slow but sure, as though memorizing the shape of loyalty. Walter didn't tell Ethan everything at once, but over the following days, truth seeped in like cold into the boards of the cabin. The man who had taught Ethan how to cut wood straight, now struggled to walk across the room without pausing for breath. He still worked, still taught. But Ethan began quietly taking over, lifting instead of watching, fetching tools before being asked, finishing cuts Walter pretended he hadn't started. One night, while the fire cracked low and the stew cooled untouched on the stove, Walter called Ethan into the workshop. The room smelled of cedar, oil, and all the things a man leaves behind in the shape of furniture and lessons. Walter sat on a stool, shoulders squared despite the exhaustion behind them. "There's one thing I need you to do for me when I'm gone," he said. He did not soften the word gone. He had never been a man to dress death in smaller clothing. Ethan's chest tightened. "Name it." Walter rested a hand on his shoulder. The grip still firm, still mentor strong. "Take care of Rex. Don't leave him to wonder where I went. Dogs feel loss louder than people do, and he deserves better than silence." Ethan felt his eyes burn, but his voice held. "I will. I swear it." Walter nodded once, satisfied. Not emotional, just certain. Then he reached into the drawer of the workbench and pulled out a small velvet box, the surface worn from years of opening and closing. Inside lay a Marine Corps emblem, a bronze eagle, globe, and anchor pin. Not shiny and new, but burnished with time and sweat, the kind handed to a man who had stood where history bruised him. "I got this after my last deployment," Walter said. "Men I served with didn't make it home to wear theirs. I did, and I've carried the weight of that ever since." He closed the box, placed it in Ethan's hand. "I'm not giving it to you because you're a Marine. I'm giving it to you because you fought your way back from a different kind of battlefield, and you didn't run." Ethan had no words, only breath, and even that felt borrowed. Rex lifted his head, looking between them, sensing the ceremony in the air. The old man rested his palm against the dog's neck. "He won't understand why I leave," Walter said softly. "But he'll stay loyal anyway. That's who he is." The fire popped. A clock ticked. For a moment, the whole world felt as still as the wood grain of the workbench. Ethan finally spoke, voice rough. "You won't go through this alone." Walter smiled, not the wide kind, but the small, grateful one worn by men who once believed they would die without ever being seen. "You already made sure of that," he said. Walter passed quietly on a cold morning in early spring. The kind of morning where the frost still clung to the porch railings, but the birds were already testing the idea of sunlight. Ethan found him in his bed, lying on his side as if simply resting after a long day in the workshop. His face held no pain, just a softness Ethan had never seen before, like a man finally allowed to put his burdens down. Rex was there, curled tightly at Walter's chest, his head resting against the still body, eyes open, refusing to accept a world where his master no longer breathed. When Ethan knelt beside them, Rex didn't move. He only lifted his eyes, and in them was something deeper than grief, something like loyalty grieving its final promise. Ethan sat on the floor beside the bed for a long time, one hand on Rex's back, the other on the quilt that covered the man who had saved him. There was no dramatic moment, no final words, no thunder in the sky. Just the quiet truth that death sometimes arrives like a guest who lets himself in, sits down, and waits to be noticed. There was work to be done after that. Phone calls, signatures, arrangements. But Ethan handled it the way Walter had taught him. One task at a time. No panic. No waste of breath. Mrs. Harper came by with red-rimmed eyes and left flowers on the porch. Nathan drove up in his truck, silent and stiff, but placed his large hand on Ethan's shoulder and squeezed once. his version of a eulogy. A few men from town, former veterans with weathered hands and steady stares, came for the burial, saluted the grave, and left without speeches. Walter Briggs had not needed speeches to be known. The house felt different afterward. Not empty, just waiting. The silence was no longer the silence of peace, but the silence of a question. What now? The answer came from the workshop itself. The half-finished projects, the racks of tools, the smell of cedar dust. Everything seemed to hold the shape of Walter's voice. Ethan stood in the middle of the room and remembered what the old man had said. Somebody taught me so I'd teach someone else someday. The word someday no longer belonged to Ethan alone. So he began the statue. He chose a block of oak, hard, stubborn, worthy of Walter, and set it upright on the carving stand. Day by day he worked, chisel tapping, dust falling like snow, the form slowly emerging. The shoulders first, straight and proud, the jaw next, angular and weathered, the lines of the marine jacket, the folded hands. Every strike of the chisel felt like a conversation, a thank you Ethan had never spoken aloud. Rex stayed beside him through the entire process, never once leaving the shop except to eat or sleep. The dog seemed to understand. This was not just carving. This was memory taking shape. When the statue was finished, Ethan carried it outside and placed it at the front of the house, facing the road, where anyone walking up the gravel path would see Walter standing, guard forever. He built a small wooden sign beneath it. The words were burned in by hand. The Walter Wood School for those who still deserve a second chance. Ethan didn't place his own name on it. That wasn't the point. He fixed the workshop, added 2 more benches, repaired the gutters, and posted a handwritten flyer at the local shelter, the VA office, and the grocery store bulletin board. Free woodwork training for homeless men, unemployed workers, or veterans looking for a way back. No fees, no forms, just willingness. The first student came 3 weeks later, a thin, jumpy man in his late 20s named Calvin, with nervous hands and sleeves that hid needle scars. He looked at the ground when he spoke, voice low and uneven. Ethan recognized the posture. He had worn it once himself. He welcomed him in, showed him where the tools were, and introduced Rex, who greeted the man the same way he once greeted Ethan. Slowly, respectfully, with silent acceptance. More students followed. An older veteran with hearing loss, a man recently laid off from a factory, a runaway teen with bruised knuckles and nowhere left to go. They came uncertain, left with calluses and something like hope. Ethan never preached, never pretended to be a savior. He taught the way Walter taught. Patient hands, quiet correction, trust first, instruction second. Rex became the silent mascot of the school, walking between benches, sleeping in sawdust, nudging shaking hands into calm ones. People worked better when the dog was close. Everyone noticed it. One evening, after the last student had gone, Ethan stood outside beside the statue. The sunset lit the carved face gold, and for a moment, the wood looked almost alive. Rex sat beside him, eyes fixed on the figure, tail sweeping gently across the floorboards, as if greeting his master the only way he could now. Ethan put a hand on the wooden shoulder and said quietly, "You saved one life. I'll make sure it wasn't the only one." The wind moved through the pines. The workshop lights glowed behind him, and from somewhere deep inside the house, the tools waited for tomorrow. Because the truth was simple. When one man is saved, 100 others might someday follow the same road back. Walter had saved Ethan. Now Ethan would save the rest. Sometimes God doesn't send miracles in the form of lightning from the sky. Sometimes He sends a quiet old man, a loyal dog, a warm meal on the right day, or a single sentence that pulls someone away from the edge of a bridge. Walter saved Ethan, not with money, not with power, but with kindness, patience, and the belief that every life can start again, even when the world says it's already over. And that is how God works in our lives, through people, through hands that lift instead of push, through voices that say, "You still matter," through second chances we never expected, but always needed. Maybe you are Walter for someone. Maybe you are Ethan, waiting for a hand that doesn't judge. Or maybe you are Rex, the silent companion who reminds others that love doesn't need words. So today, before the video ends, take a moment to say, "Thank you, God, for the people who didn't give up on me." And if life ever gives you the chance, be that miracle for someone else. May God bless everyone watching this video, with strength when life feels heavy, with hope when days feel dark, and with a heart that still chooses kindness. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment below. Tell us, who is the Walter in your life? Or who is the Rex that never left you? Like this video if you believe kindness can save lives. Share it, because someone out there might need this reminder today. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss the next story of hope, faith, and second chances. May God watch over you and your family. May He guide your steps, heal your wounds, and bless your journey, just as He blessed Ethan's. God is still writing stories. Thank you for being part of this one.